West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I want to show you a job posting up right now on recruiting sites like Glassdoor. Director of Registration and Elections, Fulton County, Georgia. This is where you can apply to be the top elections official for Atlanta and its suburbs, for the biggest county in that state. You can apply right here online. There's a fancy brochure attached to the posting. Residents and visitors can experience world-class arts, culture, sports, shopping, dining and entertainment, including the High Museum of Art, the Atlanta History Center, the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, and the World of Coca-Cola Museum. The World of Coca-Cola Museum. Now, of course, if you're recruiting for any job, you often have to make the hard sell. But the job of running elections in Fulton County, Georgia has been an especially hard sell. It's been vacant for 10 months. Why might people not want that job? Well, in addition to all the formal responsibilities, the last person in the role found himself having to give press conferences like this one in late 2020.
I also want to read a statement about a video that I'm sure some of you have seen circulating about an election worker. The worker has been accused of discarding a ballot while being assigned to operating one of the 5 ballot cutting machines. He was merely discarding a list of instructions that had been put into one of the envelopes. It was taken and uploaded to Twitter. He is currently in hiding because he's had threats. He's had to shut down all of his social media, and they know all of his personal information was released.
The person debunking that baseless and dangerous Trump conspiracy theory, that was Richard Barron, Director of Registration and Elections in Fulton County, Georgia. Barron stepped down last fall after 8 years overseeing voter registration and polling places and ballot counting, but found himself, along with other Georgia elections officials, on the front line against Trump's big lie, defending himself and his staff from threats and conspiracy theories. Fulton County is where a grand jury has been investigating Trump's efforts to overturn the vote and his infamous call to Georgia's top elections official, Brad Raffensperger. Fulton County is also where Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss served as election workers. In exchange for their service, they became targets of dangerous conspiracies from Trump world.
Threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name, and I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security.
How do you convince someone to come to work in an elections office after hearing stories like that? But it's not just Fulton County, Georgia. Colorado's top elections official told the New York Times that one county clerk has started wearing body armor to work. Another conducts business behind bulletproof glass. Last month, the Justice Department charged a Missouri man for threatening the life of an elections official in Maricopa County, Arizona. And the Justice Department says it's gotten reports of more than 1,000 threats to election workers.
I'm concerned about the really disturbing nature of the threats that we've seen. They've been disturbingly aggressive and violent and personal. We set up an election threats task force.
A survey this spring from the Brennan Center found that 1 in 6 local election officials have personally experienced threats, and nearly a third said they knew people who had left their jobs, at least in part because of safety concerns. Now, look, the tactic of harassing and intimidating election workers is not new. During the Florida recount in 2000, a group of demonstrators, including well-dressed Republican operatives, stormed a Miami office where ballots were being counted. Future Trump ally Roger Stone took credit for the whole thing. But by the time votes were being counted in 2020, election workers were facing much more serious threats.
I can tell you that my wife and my mother are very concerned for me, but we have security here. We have law enforcement who are protecting us. I am concerned for the safety of my staff.
In Gillespie County, Texas, about 2 hours west of Austin, election workers hired security guards and off-duty police for protection after Election Day 2020. Gillespie County is known for its peach harvest and its vineyards, but it's not known as a political battleground. Trump carried that county with 79% of the vote in 2020. Nonetheless, election staff still faced continued harassment and threats, enough that all 3 election administrators resigned in recent weeks. All of them. The top elections official there, Anissa Herrera, told a local newspaper, "After the 2020 election, I was threatened, I've been stalked, I've been called out on social media, and it's just dangerous misinformation." Now, early voting for the midterms is just weeks away. But if you log on to the Gillespie County website, right now, you'll see it says Elections Administrator TBD. "I'm understaffed and underpaid," Herrera told the paper, "and I've been asking for help for a while, and at some point you just have to take care of yourself." But in her resignation letter, Herrera says there's an additional reason she's leaving the job. Quote, "Absurd legislation completely changed the job I initially accepted." She's pointing to the package of voting restrictions that Texas Republicans passed last year that barred election officials from promoting the use of vote by mail, that barred them from sending out absentee ballot applications unless they've been requested first, that empowered partisan poll watchers. When we talk about the absence of election workers, we can't talk only about the ridiculous and shocking and unacceptable threats and intimidation. We also need to talk about the Republican legislatures that are making it harder for these election workers to do their jobs. Since the beginning of last year, 18 states have passed restrictive voting laws, according to the Brennan Center. In Georgia, the Election Integrity Act of 2021 puts new limits on mail-in voting, but it also gives state elections officials, people appointed by the Republican legislature, the power to swoop in and take over local election offices. Perhaps offices like the one in Fulton County, where Richard Barron was in charge until last fall. Barron pointed to that law as another reason why he left his job. "The threats, I could have dealt with those," he told the Washington Post, "but I was tired of trying to fight for the job every day," he said, asserting that Republican officials on the county commission and in the state legislature made the role inhospitable. It's true that top Republican officials in battlegrounds like Georgia and Arizona stood firm against Trump's big lie, but it's also true that those same Republicans have defended the laws that now make it harder to cast ballots and make it harder for public officials like Richard Barron to do their jobs. In his goal to overturn the 2020 election, Donald Trump failed. But his effort to weaken our elections, to limit ballot access, to frighten away the very people who make our voting go smoothly, that may be working. And if you don't believe me, just try finding someone to run some of the key elections offices in the country ahead of November. And joining me now is Richard Barron, the former Director of Registration and Elections in Fulton County, Georgia. Also here from Georgia, Latasha Brown, co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. Thank you both for coming on the show. Richard, let me start with you. It was not just your staff, but you yourself who came under attack from Trump. He put your face up on the screen at a rally. You said you received more than 100 threatening phone calls after the 2020 election. What was that like, and had you ever experienced anything like that before?
No, I'd never experienced anything close to that before. I mean, after the 2018 election, there was some of that happened because once Stacey Abrams lost, there were some people that came after me because I'd done election observation missions overseas in former Soviet countries. And so I had people accusing me of being a Russian mole at that point.
But not quite the same as death threats and violent threats.
No, I didn't have any of the death threats and violence that we got in December of 2020. And
Richard,
all for June.
Talk about not only the threats and the intimidation, but how did the Georgia voting law, the new law, make it harder for you to do your job?
Well, I think there were several things. First of all, it compressed the time that you can send absentee by mail. It also put the pall of the investigation on us that the Secretary of State can order, or the state election board. And that happened. Luckily, there were 3 upstanding people that that were appointed to that investigation committee. And from everything they told me before I left, they had no plans to take it over. I don't know what's happened since, but that is a threat that is out there, and it's unfortunate because I think it weaponizes the SEB and the state election board, who are dominated by Republicans.
Latasha, we have an election coming up this November. What are the risks of local election offices like the one in Fulton County not having a permanent director in place?
I think that's what we're seeing right now. I think we're seeing in a space where they're not having direction, having clear direction. Sometimes just even the confusion and the fear can actually add to the fear. In addition to that, you do have election officials. It's been hard around recruiting even poll workers because there is so much uncertainty and there was so much violence connected to people feeling unsafe, just as we've just heard. And I think the third thing is really around how this administrative process has been weaponized on all levels. Not only has it been weaponized against voters to create a sense of fear and intimidation for voters, but also workers. For the most part, when you look in the state has really ran in the last 10 years. When you're looking at the state, you've had Republican and Democratic election officials who've worked, quite frankly, pretty well on election board. There have been people who know the process, that worked with a sense of integrity. And now what we're seeing is the politicization of even this administrative process to weaponize it in such a way that I think it's like death through attrition, that we're going to undermine and consolidate power through the attrition of really being able to damage and create this culture of fear for workers and for voters.
And Richard, what advice would you give in this day and age to anyone who wants to lead an elections office in Georgia or another battleground state?
Well, I think one of the scariest things, it just isn't the death threats and those types of things, but you need to establish some sort of relationship with the commissioners, the county commissioners, because you have a lot of county commissioners, especially in Fulton County, who perpetuate falsehoods, and they take things out of context in reports. And in fact, we had one commissioner who told us that we were the worst election department of all the third world countries in the world. I've served as an election observer in many third world countries, and I don't even know if he's ever been out of the country. But to make accusations like that, especially to an elections department that had 99.9% black staff, I think verges on racism. And I think that's one of the things that when you come in and you work for Fulton County, you have to know that Fulton County, even though it's the 50th largest county in the state, punches way above its weight. There is a lot of responsibility there because this used to be the heart of the civil rights movement, where Martin Luther King is from. And so anyone that's coming into Fulton County or even the rest of Georgia, they have to recognize what Georgia means to the rest of the country.
It is Monday, the 19th of September of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because you know what happens on a weekend. You have Mondays right after the weekend. Unless it's a holiday, and then it's an extended weekend. But we don't have one of those. No, even though the Queen is dead, and everything's supposed to stop until she's, interred. We don't have monarchs here, but you wouldn't be able to tell by our media consumption of it. Jeez. Or is it consumption or is it being forced on us? Yeah. All right. Well, I guess everybody wanted to have a prince. Everybody wanted to have a princess. And then the people who wanted queens are going to be put in jail because they wanted queens. I know, I'm mixing metaphors. How are you today? Are you hanging in there? Did you see that Trump rally with the raised stiff arm salute with the one finger up? Now, some people had said that is a symbol for the QAnon group, that where goes one, all we go, or whatever it is. Where goes one, all we go. And that's what the finger was pointing up at. I remember the finger being put up because of, well, there was one way. And that was Jesus's way. It was a symbol that you saw a lot at Jesus Freak festivals. And they put their finger up pointing at God. Well, in this one, at the Trump rally, God is Trump. Trump is God. He's not even God's emissary on earth. He is God himself, I guess, since God supposedly has a gender. I always thought that if God was God, God didn't have a gender. God was God. It didn't make any sense to me. I tried to discuss it with the nuns and the priests at the Catholic school, but they weren't having any of it. Oh, no. Yes, you have to confess to the priest who you call father. All right. You know, in some societies, the uncle is the nice guy, and mom and dad are the bad people. They're the ones that enforce the discipline, and then the uncles and aunts, sort of like are the nice cops. Some civilizations or some cultures turn that around. And the uncle is the bad guy. I think that's what it is here in America. Usually your crazy uncle is the QAnon freak with the stiff arm salute and the one finger pointing up. All right. How quickly it turns about. Now, I got to remind folks, there's only one party that fell for the brainwashing. And why is that? Was it the party that for generations pretty much valorized greed as good? The party that said, hey, the Civil War was the war of Northern aggression. Now, one would think it was the Democrats, but the Republican Party changed from the party of Lincoln and turned into the Democrats because they were the Democrats to begin with, and they infiltrated the Republican Party and took it over so that they could hold on to power. We'll get a bunch of these stupid people voting for us thinking we're really the party of Lincoln. Ha, ha, ha. And then the rest of those races left the Democratic Party by the 1950s and 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. And then the Republican Party became fully owned by the Southern, shall we say, insurrectionists, seditionists, traitors. Now, we're talking about the white people, okay? We're not talking about black people who are enslaved and have to live there. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what is going on now. Right down to the old White Citizens Council strategy of the reverse freedom riders. And that was so cruel. I remember reading about that. I remember seeing it on TV. Both CBS and NBC, Walter Cronkite and Chet Huntley and David Brinkley had it on. Fooling people into going somewhere else, and they're going to meet John Kennedy. Okay. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now, but racists don't care. And DeSantis, I got to tell you, you think DeSantis is some sort of like giant? He's a 5'9" Mussolini. Wannabe. Because the question is, can the guy make the trains run on time? Maybe he can. He's highly educated. And did you know that Mussolini was not a dimwit, even though he was a buffoon? And that's why DeSantis is also a buffoon. A political stunt. That's what they're calling this, a political stunt. Some of you may have seen this on social media, but I made the statement that when the Nazis tricked the Jews onto cattle cars with a promise of a better life and really meaningful jobs, Arbeit macht frei, no one called that a political stunt. Okay. And then, when their propaganda didn't work, they just went out and lied and made up the propaganda anyway. It was all ready to go. They had a Fox News crew there, but they didn't tell anybody so they could get the food pantry ready. And then, after they had fed them and kept them for a few days, they have to get to their appointments for their hearings. That's the other thing. They're not illegal aliens. We kept hearing they're illegal aliens, illegal aliens. They're asylum seekers who are allowed to be here, and they have a court hearing, a court date. In some cases, today. And what did Abbott and DeSantis do? They sent them thousands of miles away from where their court appointments are to be. No money. Nothing. So then when the good people of Martha Vineyard, who I got to remind folks, sure, everybody thinks, oh, yeah, it's the land of all the rich people and the Obamas live there. We got to make them live next to the Obamas. Yeah, you racist effer. Of course you do. Well, but what people forget about Martha's Vineyard is that it is Lawyer Island. So you got the lawyers involved now with allegations of kidnapping. So when the good people of Martha Vineyard consolidated their resources and figured out how to get these asylum seekers so that they can get closer to where they're supposed to meet their court date, what did the right wing and Fox do? They said, oh, Martha Vineyard is deporting them. They couldn't even keep them there for a couple of days. They deported them. They have court dates. They are asylum seekers, and you're talking about deporting people back to where they escaped? And Venezuelans, too. They're mostly Venezuelans, and they're going to send them back to a commie totalitarian country, and they're laughing about it. Because it ain't about the communism. It's all about the racism. Whatever it takes to, rile the base. Whatever it takes to incite them. And when I say incite, I mean violence. There was only one party who descended into this madness. Democrats didn't become SLA members. Democrats didn't become Students for a Democratic Society, even. Though we had many in the Students for a Democratic Society, Hayden being one who I actually became somewhat friends with towards the end of his life. No, the Democratic Party didn't fall into a morass of brainwashing by a hostile foreign power. Why was it that one party, and it seems like the whole damn party, is caught up in this? No wonder we have a problem here, because when you have half the country, or actually not half, but, a third, that's still a sizable amount of tens of millions of people. What are you going to do? How do you re-educate that? And I've always made the joke, you can't re-educate someone who hasn't been educated to begin with. One party is involved in the most extreme political violence that we've seen since maybe the Civil War? Maybe. So it's not enough to say, we'll just vote them out. Nazis do not care about the law. They make up the law as they go along. That's why we have a problem with our courts right now, don't we? They were packing the courts with Trump appointees even after he lost the election, but Obama couldn't have even one towards the supposed end of his presidency because there was over a year left before he was going to have to leave, and we got to let the voters decide. And then when the voters decided, they want to keep people from voting. Just like the Nazis did. You know, there was only one party that could vote during the Nazi regime, and you know who they were. Yeah, they weren't letting the commies vote. And anyway, they didn't really have voting per se. On some of the local level, maybe they did. But generally, the Burgermeister of the region determined what was going to happen. And he had to kick that up to old Adolf. So there's a lot of people who are actually upset that Trump is not behind bars while we ferret this out, and that he's free to go to these hate rallies and rile up the base to incite more violence. Well, there's a lot going on in that, isn't there? But it's not enough to say we can just vote them out. We have to punch these Nazis, and we have to punch them where it hurts, and usually where it hurts is in the bank. In their wallets. And I'm talking about these billionaire fascists funding all this. Dark money? How about we just expose it right now? We have the intelligence in which to do it. Why don't we put it to good use? Why don't we? Well, why don't we also tell you what we have in store for you for the rest of the shows? Most of the shows like just going into the rant once again. Well, as we begin, yes, Republicans are spurring a shortage of poll workers through violent intimidation, and you know that's how it works. If you mess up the mechanism of even how the votes are counted, everything is suspect, isn't it? One party did this. On the rest of the menu, Russian trolls worked overtime to disrupt the 2017 Women's March against Trump, just like we told you so. Republicans in key battleground races refuse to say they will accept the midterm election results, whereas Democratic candidates said they would. And MAGA Republicans wear their cruelty as a badge of honor. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a tropical storm slammed southwestern Japan with fierce rainfall, flooding, and winds, injuring dozens of people as it swerved north toward Tokyo. And Hurricane Fiona bore down on the Dominican Republic after knocking out the power grid and unleashing floods and landslides in Puerto Rico. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, it really helps us pay our bills and fly under the radar so that we can continue this powerhouse of resistance. Thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Co's. So you can check out those show notes and links because that's really where the real reportage is. And you can find them by going to my Twitter feed because the links are there. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. All right, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays, because we really burned up a lot of time at the top there. This offering is by the Great T-Bog out of Raw Story. According to a comprehensive report from the New York Times' Ellen Berry, an army of Russian internet trolls were deployed by the Kremlin in 2017 to sow discord among the leaders and attendees of the massive Women's March in D.C. and other cities across the country. The march gained massive coverage as feminists pushed back at the election of Donald Trump. As Berry wrote, more than 4 million people took part in the combination and protest and march, but more than 4,000 miles away, organizations linked to the Russian government had assigned teams to the Women's March. At desks in bland offices in St. Petersburg, using models derived from advertising and public relations, copywriters were testing out social media messages critical of the Women's March movement, adopting the personas of fictional Americans. And who fell for it? One party fell for this. The report notes that the trolls tried out messaging aimed at turning black women against white women, posing as conservative women complaining they were being shut out, as well as men mocking the participants. However, as the report notes, the Russians felt they had their target when they singled out Muslim activist Linda Sarsour, who was one of the march organizers. Now, part of falling for this brainwashing, in my construct of it, though, so just bear with me, is sowing discord and disruption. That is not necessarily brainwashing, but it is active measures. So let's keep the two a little bit separated here. According to the report, Sarsour discovered after the march that she had been targeted. What she saw on Twitter that Monday was a torrent of focused grievance that targeted her. In 15 years as an activist, largely advocating for the rights of Muslims, she had faced pushback. But this was of a different magnitude. A question began to form in her mind. Do they really hate me that much? As the report notes, it was all a fraud being perpetuated by the Russians, and they were not done. Over the 18 months that followed, Russia's troll factories and its military intelligence service put a sustained effort into discrediting the movement by circulating damning, often fabricated narratives about Ms. Sarsour, whose activism made her a lightning rod for Trump's base, and also for some of his most ardent opposition. 152 different Russian accounts produced material about her. Public archives of Twitter accounts known to be Russian contain 2,642 tweets about Ms. Sarsour, many of which found large audiences, according to an analysis by Advanced Democracy, Inc., a nonpartisan organization that conducts public interest research and investigations. I should note that now you can't really call them nonpartisan because if you're for democracy, that is now a partisan issue. Okay, just so you know. As Berry wrote, the attempt to undermine the Women's March was yet another ploy by the Russians to create disruption and chaos in the U.S. Feminism was an obvious target because it was viewed as a, quote, Western agenda, unquote, and hostile to the traditional values that Russia represented. Yeah, get in there and make my dinner.
Already for months, Russian accounts purporting to belong to black women had been drilling down on racial rifts within American feminism. The job was not to put forward arguments, but to prompt a visceral emotional reaction, ideally one of indignation. Amy Gardner, Hannah Knowles, Colby Itkowitz, and Annie Linsky of the Washington Post brings us this next offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A dozen Republican candidates in competitive races for governor and Senate have declined to say whether they would accept the results of their contests, raising the prospect of fresh post-election chaos 2 years after Trump refused to concede the presidency. In a survey by the Washington Post of 19 of the most closely watched statewide races in the country, the contrast between Republican and Democratic candidates was stark. While 7 GOP nominees committed to accepting the results of their contests, 12 either refused to commit or declined to respond. On the Democratic side, 18 said they would accept the outcome, and 1 did not respond to the Post survey. The reluctance of many GOP candidates to embrace a long-standing tenet of American democracy shows how Trump's assault on the integrity of U.S. elections has spread far beyond the 2020 presidential race. This year, multiple losing candidates could refuse to accept their defeats. Trump, who continues to claim without evidence that his loss to Joe Biden in 2020 was rigged, has attacked fellow Republicans who do not agree, making election denialism the price of admission in many GOP primaries. More than half of all Republican nominees for federal and statewide office, with powers over election administration, have embraced unproven claims that fraud tainted Biden's win. Acceptance of an electoral outcome, win or lose, was once a virtual certainty in American politics, although there have been exceptions. In 2018, Georgia Democratic gubernatorial nominee Stacey Abrams cited voter suppression as a reason for refusing to concede defeat to Republican opponent Brian Kemp, but unlike Trump, Abrams never sought to overturn the certified result or foment an insurrection. Final offering here in the Bistro Cafe in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's River City Hash Mondays is out of the Washington Post by, yes, Jennifer Rubin. It's an opinion piece, but I think she has quite an opinion that I should share. Many in the media had a meltdown when President Biden called the MAGA movement semi-fascist. They tut-tutted because they said his speech in Philadelphia was too divisive. In reality, the fault in Biden's speech is that he was not tough enough on Republicans. Biden seems to believe there is a mass of normal, non-MAGA Republicans out there. If there is, it is a small minority in the party. Most are all too comfortable with the extremism and violent rhetoric of their peers. Donald Trump and his flunkies have predicted violence if he were prosecuted for hoarding highly classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago resort. And he did it again last Thursday, declaring that if he were indicted, the country would have problems, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen before. He added that Americans would not stand for prosecution. His statement is an incitement to violence, plain and simple. It echoes the same rhetoric he deployed in the run-up to the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. No pundit or Republican official who continues to defend Trump or who feigns outrage at characterizations that his movement is fascist can claim ignorance. Scores of Republican election deniers are on the ballot, including many who sought actively to overturn the 2020 election. To call these individuals conservatives or to treat them as garden variety candidates is to conceal that they too are a threat to democracy. And the horror show does not stop there. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the Post last week claimed credit for flying dozens of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, a resort off Massachusetts, to make a political point about the record influx of those coming across the southern border. Some called it depraved, others labeled it inhumane. Let's put it this way. Sending migrants to liberal elites attempts to use non-white human beings as punishment. This conduct is not only dehumanizing, it is racist. As Jonathan V. Last explains at the Bulwark, DeSantis used migrants as props because he saw he could use them as a means to the ends of his personal ambition. He concluded, I'm really trying to not get too hot here, but Christians should look at this act and be revolted. They should be horrified. Some are no doubt, but the MAGA base is delighted, which is why DeSantis is doing it. All right, we better get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Between Horniness and Holiness. That's how one of Leonard Cohen's friends summed up the writer and performer's life in the new biopic Leonard Cohen, A Journey, a Song. This one avoids most biopic formulas in that it's as much a story about the famous song, Hallelujah, as it is about the man who wrote it. Directors Daniel Geller and Dana Goldfein wisely stick to Cohen's professional life and the song's part in it, and away from, especially, the horniness aspect, which, given the number of relationships and kids that he had, could easily fill a 10-part streaming series. The episode about his affair with Janis Joplin would probably be killer. The holiness part is dealt with more thoroughly, as without knowing about his spiritual journey from the Orthodox Judaism he was born into in 1930s Montreal to being a trained Zen master, it would be hard to understand the song, the hymn, really, that Hallelujah in fact is. The reasoning behind the edits of the original lyrics of the song as it's appeared in various formats, like the Shrek movie, is explored in this one. A relatively well-known fact about the iconic 1984 Hallelujah track is that Cohen's label, Columbia, headed up then by Walter Yetnikoff, the same wizard who wouldn't release Springsteen's Nebraska until threatened with legal action, prevented the U.S. release of the album containing the song, Various Positions. It was released in the UK, which might have been where Welsh musician and Velvet Underground member John Cale first heard it before creating one of the song's most beloved covers a few years before the familiar Jeff Buckley version in the 90s. Leonard Cohen, A Journey, A Song, is a must-see for fans and an informative doc for any arts-curious moviegoer. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Hey kids and parents, it's back to school time. As you shop for school supplies and get ready for class, make sure you have emergency plans in place. Did you know that emergency preparedness plays a major role in school life? Throughout the year, schools actively prepare for natural disasters, outbreaks, and other emergency situations. Students and parents need to be aware and learn what to do during an emergency. Every family should build an emergency kit, make a family disaster plan, and be informed about events that could affect their community. Parents, take a few extra steps to help children be prepared. Make sure they know the full name, address, and phone numbers of parents or guardians. In our high-tech world of cell phones, memorizing emergency phone numbers is very important. Include a copy of this information in their backpack. Other items to keep in their backpack include water and non-perishable snacks, a pocket-sized first aid kit, a whistle to alert others for help, and a list of allergies, medical conditions, and medications. Make sure their school and teacher have a copy, too. Be familiar with different routes and ways to travel home, like walking, taking the bus, or riding home with another student who lives nearby. Establish a secret code word with your child and whoever takes them home from school to protect against an unauthorized person picking them up. This list is a great starting point to prepare your student for the upcoming school year. Customize these steps to fit your child's capabilities and needs. Ask school administrators and teachers about emergency preparedness plans so you know what steps they are taking to keep your child safe. Many schools have guidelines on how to shelter in place during natural disasters, how to secure classrooms during an emergency lockdown, and how to teach preparedness curriculum to students. Remember, emergency preparedness is important for everyone. Children who are prepared are more confident during stressful emergency situations. By following preparedness guidelines, parents, children, and school staff can improve their safety and peace of mind. For more information on school emergency preparedness, visit cdc.gov/children/schools. To learn more about disasters and emergency preparedness, follow @CDC Emergency on Twitter or visit emergency.cdc.gov. So, let's get prepared. Have a great school year.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
What is the Speech and Debate Clause, and why should you care? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In November 2020, Senator Lindsey Graham made telephone calls to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, the state official responsible for overseeing elections. State prosecutors now want Senator Graham to testify before the state grand jury that is investigating potential illegalities surrounding the 2020 presidential election in that state. But Senator Graham is claiming in federal court that he can't be required to testify because of the Speech and Debate Clause. The Speech and Debate Clause, part of Article 1, which sets forth the powers of Congress, says that senators and representatives for any speech or debate in the House or the Senate shall not be questioned in any other place. And the Supreme Court has clearly ruled that the Speech and Debate Clause extends to legislative activities that are part of the elected official's job. So, with regard to Senator Graham's case, the Federal District Court has ruled that the Speech and Debate Clause does shield Senator Graham from having to answer questions that would intrude on his legislative fact-finding. But the court also ruled that the Speech and Debate Clause does not prevent questions that would inquire about potentially pressuring election officials to change the election results and related matters. The case now heads back to the Court of Appeals, where Mr. Graham's brief is due by October 11th. An important decision on the Speech and Debate Clause is forthcoming. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1981. More than 400,000 union members marched in Labor Day's first Solidarity Day demonstration in Washington, D.C. The demonstration was called by the AFL-CIO to protest the Reagan administration's policies and the firing of striking air traffic controllers. At the beginning of August, nearly 13,000 air traffic controllers had walked out after talks with the Federal Aviation Administration collapsed. At least 7,000 flights were canceled on that day. The Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization wanted an annual wage increase and a reduction in work hours. The FAA counteroffer fell far short of what the union wanted. Reagan declared the strike was illegal and eventually fired every striking PATCO worker. President Reagan even went as far as to impose lifetime bans on rehiring any of these workers. The union was decertified in October of 1981. PATCO was just the beginning. Reagan's policies were definitely anti-union. He put union foes in control of the very agencies that were designed to protect and further the rights and interests of workers. He named Donald Dotson the chairman of the National Labor Relations Board. The NLRB oversees union representation elections and labor management bargaining. Dotson let his opinions on unions known when he said that unionized labor relations have been the major contributors to the decline and failure of once healthy industries and have caused destruction of individual freedom. Under Dotson, the board abandoned its purpose to promote collective bargaining. The NLRB settled only about half as many complaints of employers' illegal actions as the board during the Carter administration. Those that were settled upheld employers in 3/4 of the cases. The Reagan-era anti-union policies and attacks on workers have had serious repercussions that workers are still suffering from to this day.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 56 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 80, though we will have rain mostly through the day, a bit of rain falling at the moment, and we had, a bit of rain yesterday as well. Not heavy rain, but enough that I didn't have to water anything, and that's always good because the water came from the sky. And so we will have mostly cloudy conditions with some rain throughout the day. Winds will be light and variable. And then partly cloudy tonight and followed by showers developing around 8 to 10 local. Lows will be in the mid-50s, winds light and variable. And rain today and tonight should bring with it something a little less than a quarter inch, but we will have cloudy with showers tomorrow, highs in the low 70s, winds light and variable, and that rain should bring with it about a quarter of an inch. And then on Wednesday, we are looking at severe thunderstorms and heavy rain. So we'll see how that unfolds. And, of course, I should remind folks this is a confluence between a northern storm coming out of Alaska and then a hurricane typhoon type coming out of from the south that actually hit the Bay Area. So we're getting remnants of both of those storms right here in the confluence of it. Ragweed pollen is considered moderate in spite of it all. The air quality index, though, is good at 23 parts per million. And that daytime UV index has notched a bit lower into the fall moderate range at level 5. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.84 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 64 and mostly cloudy, and they're crying tears of sorrow because the Queen is in the chapel and about ready to be interred. Paris is 65 and sunny. Rome is 78 and partly cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory that could kick out their electric grid. Kyiv is 57 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 68 and clear. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 82 and mostly cloudy with a lot of wind. And we have a weather update for them. Sydney, Australia is 56 and clear. San Francisco, California is 62 degrees and sunny. And New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Yuri Kagayama of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. A tropical storm slammed southwestern Japan with rainfall and winds today, leaving one person dead and another missing as it swerved north toward Tokyo. Residential streets were flooded with muddy water from rivers and swaths of homes lost power after Typhoon Nanmadol made landfall in the Kyushu region yesterday Sunday, then weakened to a tropical storm. Nanmadol has sustained winds blowing at about 67 miles per hour and gusts up to 100 miles per hour, according to the Japan Meteorological Agency. Tens of thousands of people spent the night at gymnasiums and other facilities in a precautionary evacuation of vulnerable homes. More than 60 people were injured, including those who fell down in the rain or were hit by shards of glass. Torrential winds smashed signboards, a construction crane snapped, and a window at a pachinko parlor was shattered in Kagoshima City in southwestern Japan. Bullet trains and airlines suspended service. Warnings were issued about landslides and swelling rivers. Convenience store chains and delivery services were shuttered in southwestern Japan while some highways were closed, and people had some problems with cell phone connections. The storm is forecast to continue dumping rain on its northeasterly path over Japan's main island of Honshu before moving over to Tokyo and then northeastern Japan.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Danica Cotto of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. Hurricane Fiona roared over the Dominican Republic after knocking out power across all of Puerto Rico, causing damage the governor said was catastrophic. Many people were left without water service. No deaths have been reported, but authorities in the U.S. territory said it was too early to know the full scope of damage from an expansive storm that was still forecast to unleash torrential rain across Puerto Rico today. The island's National Weather Service said flash flooding was occurring in south-central parts of Puerto Rico and tweeted, "Move to higher ground immediately." Up to 22 inches of rain had fallen in some areas of Puerto Rico, and forecasters said another 10 inches could fall, perhaps up to 20 in some places, even as the storm moves away. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.